friends and fellow citizens. For 16 years, every year, it has been a pleasure to announce how well we have done, because we have worked hard. But this 17th year, I'll have to warn you that although we have worked hard, although we have done well, we are not going to do as well as last year, maybe only half as well, and worse, if the recession in America, if high interest rates do not go down, if it continues to be sluggish and the recovery choked off, then we shall be in for difficult times. I've just come back from a journey to visit to Britain and to America. And you know, in Britain, for 3 years running, the GNP has gone down each year. Not gone up, it's minus. In other words, each year they became poorer than last year, which means workers take home less, employers have less profits, and everybody is in a nasty mood. But it's a disease which is spreading. It's welfare spending, and it's the problem which President Reagan faces. He knows and Americans know what he wants to do: cut down social security spending, cut down entitlements, billions of dollars. And their entitlements, their welfare benefits, their pension benefits are all indexed. So every time the consumer price index goes up, the benefits go up. And who pays for it? Taxpayer. Taxpayer gets overtaxed. He does not invest, he gets no profits. Industries stagnate. But unfortunately, Congress, which must legislate, has to face elections every 2 years. So they have a midterm election this November, and I've met congressmen who tell me it's absurd, it's nonsense that any president can expect them to cut social security in an election year. So the implication being, well, if we miss cutting it this year, this November, maybe we'll cut next year. But next year is only 1 year, then again there's another election year. So this has gone on and dragged on. And the German chancellor, who was in America at the same time as I was, he went to Houston and to San Francisco and made very pointed speeches at the Americans. He says, your high interest rates, which is the result of high budget deficits, which is the result of high spending and low revenue, is sucking away all Deutschmarks from Germany, Dutch guilders from Holland, all the other euro currencies into the dollar market to earn high interest rates. And the yen too has gone into the dollar to earn high interest rates. At the moment, the interest rate is about 14%, inflation about 7%, so you have a real interest of 7%. Huh? Why go and take risks? Just put your money there. So, no production, just living off government expenditure. Well, Helmut Schmidt says if this goes on, there's going to be a Great Depression. And he says this is destabilizing European democracies because they have higher unemployment, no industrial expansion because money is going into the euro market instead of expanding factories or creating new services. Nothing can be done. Well, how did it start, this stagnation and inflation? Usually when you have inflation, you create jobs. But it's like heroin. After a while, as you pump in the money or as you pump in the heroin, it doesn't have the same effect. You've got to pump in more. So when Carter was president, inflation was going up from Gerald Ford's term about 7-8% to about 18-19%. So President Reagan stopped the printing presses. The Federal Reserve, he supports the Federal Reserve in tight money, but unfortunately, the Congress is not prepared to support him in cutting back expenditure. He must increase defense. He's gone and reduced income tax to give incentive to people to work. So that's reduced the tax revenue. He's got to cut social spending, and nobody is willing to do that. So what happens? Helmut Schmidt says if this goes on, depression. I have an awful feeling that in the first round, after bankruptcies of banks like bigger banks than Penn Square in Oklahoma or Kansas, big companies like International Harvester, and now even in Germany, AEG Telefunken. They are all strapped for cash. Purchasers have no money. Cash flow affected, high interest rates. How did it all start? Well, in 1964-65, President Johnson launched his Great Society program. You know, he wanted to make all Americans, blacks, live as well as whites. So huge programs were made, costing billions of dollars. He also had to go into Vietnam, and the Marines went there, landed in Da Nang in March '65. But he never raised taxes. Congress financed it all by getting the Federal Reserve to issue notes, what they call a fiduciary issue. You monetize your deficits. You have euphemisms. Instead of saying you print notes, you monetize the deficits. So now you say, well, all right, let's stop it. Well, you stop it, then you've got to borrow to make up for your deficits. When you borrow, you are competing with private banks, factories, industries, hotels. So the interest rates go up. And the deficit, expected deficit of 110 billion for next year, which may well become 150 billion, will soak up 4/5 of the expected savings in America. So the private sector is 1/5. And so bond specialists like Henry Kaufman says, well, it will go up 18-20%. But there is another school of thought propounded by Milton Friedman who says, just stay tight on money supply and all troubles will be solved. All troubles will be solved after a lot of bankruptcies. You know, after very major bankruptcies, it takes a lot of nerve for congressmen who are pestered by jobless workers and jobless voters to say, no, no, we must not interfere with the market mechanism. The British rescued British Leylands and lost more, hundreds of millions of pounds. The Americans told the British that they were wrong and they should have allowed British Leylands to go to the war. Suddenly, last year, Chrysler went bankrupt, or was going to go bankrupt. And should have been allowed to go to the war. But could they? Thousands of jobs were involved in Detroit. Pressure was brought to bear. Huge loans were made. Hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. And it still can't compete against Toyota, Honda, Mazda. So this is getting troublesome. Now, my fear is when you have big bankruptcies taking place, after the elections are over, by sometime next year, Congress will say, okay, well, that's enough of this theory of monetarism. Let's forget theory. Let's save jobs and save the companies. So once again, you monetize deficits. Maybe not the whole, but maybe half of it. And the other half, let's raise taxes. So you get inflation going up again. So we have another recovery. But is it a sound recovery? You know, the volatility of exchange rates between the US dollar and the Deutsche Mark, the yen, the Swiss franc, other European currencies, is a symptom of a deep malaise, a loss of confidence. It does not reflect underlying trends in the economy. You just ask yourself this. I mean, I'm not a banker. I know nothing about exchange rates. I'm not a money broker. But I know that the Japanese have a balance of payments surplus. In other words, they export more than they import. With America, $20 billion. With Europe, $10 billion. So they have a surplus of 30 billion US dollars. And the yen, which used to be 220 to $1, is now, instead of 175, is 260. It's become cheaper. So already the Toyota, the Honda, the Mazda is selling like hotcakes. You make the yen cheaper, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't know what's happened. And it is a reflection of an unstable system. It started with inflation, financing the war in Vietnam and the Great Society. Then President Johnson didn't stand for elections. Nixon was elected. He had to carry on the Vietnam War. He pulled out, but he had to keep on fighting. By 71, the dollar was in trouble. So they decoupled the link between dollar and gold. In theory, up till 1971, you present your dollar, $35, you can ask the US Treasury to say, well, all right, I want 1 fine ounce of gold. And the US Treasury will say, right, here you are, Fort Knox, I reserve for you 1 fine ounce. From 71, they severed this link. So is the dollar is worth what the dollar will buy. It sounded very good. For many years, it appeared all right. And they said, oh, gold is superstition. So the Americans sold gold on the COMEX market, together with pork, soya beans, and other things. For a while, gold was $38, $37 an ounce. One day, and the Americans say, no, we will sell gold. Whoever wants to buy, we will sell. But only for a while. After a while, they say, no, this is silly. Stop. Then came the oil crisis, and more notes were printed. 1973, quadruple. 1979, double. So the oil sheikhs have plenty of money. They say, all right, I want gold. Then wars broke out. Iran went down. The Shah went down. The Ayatollah came up. Woof. Gold hit $800. Now it's gone down, but it's never gone down below 300. What is real value? My fear is, after November, whether it's the lame duck Congress between November and January, or whether it is a new Congress that takes office on the 20th of January next year, they are not going to cut social spending. Entitlements will be indexed. Social security will be a drain on the budget. More bankruptcies, and they say, right, let's ease up money supply. In other words, print. And we have a small recovery. You see, you give the addict another big dose of heroin, so he feels all right for a while. By 1985, inflation, I was listening to Milton Friedman explaining, he says, why we must not do this. He says, if we do this, then inflation will go up to 25% in 1985. And he's right. And I think that's what's going to happen. He says, no. We will stand firm on money supply and inflation will go down to 5%. And he says, you look at the long-term bond market, you see it's 12.5%. So the average investor is very wise. He's hedging his bets. He says the possible low is 5%, possible high is 25%. So he has decided it's safe to lend long-term 12.5% interest. He won't lose money. He's hedging his bets. Well, let me tell you, if I had $1 million, I'm not going to put it in any bond at 12.5%. It's a sure way of losing money. I do not believe that the inflation is going to go down to 5%. But meanwhile, these volatile rates are affecting us, and the Singapore dollar, because we don't have deficit budgeting, has gone up. Now we have to keep a tight ship because we are a banking center and a financial supermarket. And if we don't have a stable Singapore dollar, we can't play that role. It's like the Swiss franc. it's steady. And you can move into the Swiss franc knowing that you can move out without losing. But because the dollar went up, not as high as the US dollar, but in between the US dollar and the yen, the US dollar and the Deutschmark, so our exports have gone up. And I was surprised when the managing director of Philips Singapore, Mr. Lambeck, told me last Wednesday, 4 days ago, he says, Philips Singapore now is more expensive than Philips Belgium in the products, because the Belgians have just devalued, you see. Belgium franc, you know, there's always riots in Belgium. You read the newspapers, French-speaking and Flemish-speaking, that means Dutch-speaking. They quarrel and so on. So productivity goes down. So when productivity goes down, you want to sell your goods, you allow your currency to go down. And now Philips Belgium is producing domestic electronics appliances cheaper than Philips Singapore. Now this is no good. When I heard that, I said, well, this is, where are we going? How can it be that the Singapore worker who is paid about, in real terms, probably 35% of the wages of the Belgian worker, is making a product costlier than the Belgian product? Well, I told him to put up a paper and we'll go into it and we will make sure that Philips Singapore will be cheaper than Philips Belgium. That's absolutely crucial. Meanwhile, what is the impact on us? Well, the NTUC, I told them to do a survey, and the figures they have given me tallies with what the Labour Ministry has got. Retrenchments this first 7 months of the year has been about 2,500. Electronic and electrical, about 1,600. And it's not just retrenchments, it's also layoff time or shorter time. People are working 3 days a week, 4 days a week, instead of 6 days a week. And in the first 7 months, 8,600 workers laid off for periods of up to 33 days, average being 5.6 days. And 4,000 workers have worked fewer than 6 days a week. Textiles and garments, 500 workers, or 1 in 9, have been retrenched in the first 7 months. Woodworking industry, 103 workers retrenched. Metal industry, 300 workers retrenched. Now, the Statistics Department carries out quarterly surveys of business expectations. And the last survey in June showed that 4% expected, on average, 4% expected business to get better, whereas 3 months ago, or 3 months before that, in March, 10% expected business to be better. But more important, on specific subjects like numbers employed, net balance 2% expect to employ less. Overtime to be worked, 21% expect to work less overtime. New orders received, 11% expect less. Output, 4% less. Overseas deliveries, 12% less. Stocks of raw materials, 13% holding less. Stocks of finished goods, 6% less. Average selling price, 12% expect lower average selling price. And they cite political and economic conditions abroad as the most important limiting factor for orders of 35% of the firms. And these firms are in petrol refining, manufacturing of electrical and electronic products, rubber processing, and transport equipment. Now, what's our answer to these problems? We can't change the world, but we can get ourselves in trim, increase productivity. The concept of productivity must enter into the mind of every single Singaporean, adult and child. The idea that you can do a thing faster, cheaper, with less defects, with better cooperation between workers and supervisors and managers, and using better machines. It's got to do with work attitudes. It's got to do with education, learning, skills. It's got to do with good management that brings out the best from their workers. I had a meeting, I think a good meeting, with representatives of employers' associations last Wednesday on the 11th. Now, I clarified the government's position. I told them that we accept responsibility for education, housing, and health, because the employers are a bit worried about company welfare. They'll be asked to carry all this enormous load. It's too late for us in Singapore because we inherited the British system of state welfare. It's too late in the day to convert our system into the Japanese system, where welfare is carried or looked after by the company. It's a better system, but unfortunately, it's not easy for us to switch. But we can prevent ourselves from getting deeper into state welfare and move away from state welfare. And the companies tell me what they want is not the word welfare. They like benefits. See, welfare has got a bad name because of what has happened in Europe and in America. You are entitled, see, you just collect benefits. And part of the reason why AEG Telefunken has gone into receivership is inability to compete. The Germans, one of Europe's most hard-working, thrustful, patriotic peoples. And I was reading of the rows between the Social Democrats and the Free Democrats cutting back welfare spending. And as part of the compromise now, if you're a German worker, whereas before you are entitled to go to a sanatorium, see, 2 months a year, so you just feel, oh, well, I'm not feeling well, I go to a sanatorium and sit back, hot baths and mud baths and massage. And nobody is producing anything, but you are fully paid. Now they must pay 10 Deutschmarks a day for the first 2 weeks or whatever it is, so that you really need to go to a sanatorium. See? And all the sanatorium owners are outraged because they are going to lose customers. Now the first 2 Deutschmarks for any prescription has to be paid by the worker instead of 1.5 Deutschmarks. So you collect a bottle of medicine, you pay 2 Deutschmarks. and so on, the first few days in hospital. Well, having seen what's happened, we have decided we will have none of this. We will work out, and I told the employers, not an insurance scheme like the Americans. Then you have patients sent for examination for diseases which they never went in to be treated for, because it's all covered by insurance. So you said, give him the works. Blood test, brain scan, x-rays, the lot. All charged to the insurance. So the premiums go up and up and up and up and up. We will have MediSave. We calculate that we can just about cover current expenses for Class C wards. Current expenses, not capital expenses. Not the cost of the building, the equipment, amortization. Just cost of nurses, doctors, medicines, electricity, water. If we have 6% CPF put by in MediSave, 3% from employer, 3% from worker, and if you don't go to hospital, then you can bequeath your money when you finally die at the age of 75, owning tens of thousands of dollars to your grandchildren, so that they can go and buy a house. And I estimate that over 3 to 4 years, we'll have CPF of about 25% each way, from employer and from worker. 40% roughly for housing, 6% for MediSave, 4% for contingencies. I've also suggested to the employers that they might try company. They don't like welfareism, but company benefits. And 11% of what they contribute, they will keep, but they will give a banker's guarantee. Then they can invest it any way they like and use the interest for the benefit of their workers. They're thinking it over. It's purely voluntary. They can participate if they wish and if their workers wish, or they can continue with the CPF. The employers in their reports gave our workers good marks for improved work attitudes. It shows we have a responsive people. Which shows that I haven't been wasting my breath the last year talking about productivity and all the MPs and ministers exhorting. The Singaporean is a rational creature. He thinks, he says, yes, there's some benefit for me. Let's have more teamwork. Let's cut down defects. Let's have more products produced in less time, costing less. And management style, well, employers don't like me citing the Japanese because the majority of employers here are non-Japanese. And Singaporeans also don't like to be told that the Japanese are good. Well, I think they are. And that's why they've got hefty trade surpluses. And it's a kind of social Darwinism. If you don't learn how to do it better, and he already has shown you how it can be done, maybe you can amend it, do it your way, because your culture is different and our culture in Singapore is different. But if you don't develop that team spirit and get out from that worker, that commitment, that loyalty to his company and to the team that works together for the company, then we'll be in trouble. But managers say, well, they want their own Singapore style. By all means, let's borrow all the good attributes from all good managers. But let's make it work and let's stay competitive. Because we are moving into a new technological era. At no phase in the history of human civilization are scientific and technological changes taking place at the pace they are today. In the next 20 years, the transformation in our way of life, the way we live, the way we work, will be more dramatic than the transformation from the steamship, the age of the steamship, to the age of the jet aircraft. Computers, telecommunications, robotics, space shuttles, optic fibers, they open a whole new world in which the advantage goes to the highly educated and the highly trained societies. You can be a genius, but if you're untrained and you're in the paddy fields of Guangdong or Sichuan, well, you're just raw genius. Maybe you can calculate 7 digits by 7 digits and come up with the right answer, but that's not going to be much use. You want workers who can read the computer printout or see the computer screen and says, yes, that means I've got to tap a message in. And he goes to the computer terminal and he taps counter instructions and processes go on. And we've got to train to prepare ourselves to meet that technology. I believe our young in the schools will make it because parents know the importance of education and the premium that they are prepared to pay. The private tuition that goes for their children's preschool and school uplift. The problem is we've got 600,000 workers in a workforce of just over 1 million who've already missed this training in school. You know, it was automatic promotions, 4 language streams. It took years because they were sensitive, emotionally charged problems. So it was by gradual consent of the parents choosing their own language streams for their children that we finally got 95% choosing EL1 and CL2 or ML2 and TL2. And you can't have a QC circle if one fellow speaks Mandarin, another speaks English, and a third chap speaks Tamil, and a fourth chap speaks Malay. How can you communicate? You want team work, you want QC circles, or wits, or whatever you call them, there must be interchange, ideas. You sharpen each other's ideas. And language is crucial. And somehow, I know the NTUC is facing troubles with their scheme, whatever they call it, BEST, best. But we try. We mobilize the whole teaching resources into extension or adult education classes in the evenings and at weekends. And employers must, in their own interests, help redeem, help salvage this force of 600,000. Many of them are salvageable. They are between 18 to 40 years old, and they're willing to learn. And the speed at which our taxi drivers learn to speak English with no formal instruction, just picking it off passengers, I think they will learn. And you've got to make them numerate so that they can calculate. And they can read what's on the computer, feed it back. They can see. When you use robots, you will have to read numbers, signs. So you say, press this button, change order of work or procedures. Untrained, illiterate worker is worse than useless. I hope the big employers will start in-house courses. It's expensive. We will cough up. The Skill Development Fund, if that is not enough, the government will meet it from the budget. But let's do it. Let's make this workforce ready for the 1990s. And let's make use of the slowdown in business activity to increase levels of education and levels of skills. Inculcate better work attitudes and generate team spirit. Whatever happens, we can't go back to the old Singapore. When I was a child, there was only, and was about 50 years ago, there was less than 500,000 people in Singapore, and we were all very poor. And I used to travel in a bullock cart to go to a rubber estate in Chai Chee, which my grandfather owned. Now, we cannot go back to that Singapore because we got 5 times the population. From 500,000 now we have 2.4 million. The density of population requires a higher degree of organization, higher capital, higher technology to produce the requirements, food, shelter, medicine, consumer artifacts to make life tolerable. And so far, we have succeeded. And because we have succeeded, an air of complacency sets in. People assume that stability, growth, prosperity is in the natural order of things. It's part of the nature of things. Unfortunately, I have lived long enough and seen enough riots, seen enough strikes, seen enough police clashes with workers. Every time I pass by Alexandra Road, I remember the Hockley bus depot there and workers linking arms in 1956, refusing to let the buses out, police coming in with water cannons, finally riots, students got shot, carried around, paraded around Singapore while he was bleeding. By the time he went to hospital, he was dead, made a martyr of by the unions. And that's just 20 plus years ago. I have not forgotten. It's vividly etched in my mind, and every time anybody starts anything which will unwind and unravel this orderly, organized, sensible, rational society and make it irrational, emotional, I put a stop to it. And without hesitation. And the newspapers and the media, they can write what they want. They come here with no knowledge of what it's all about. They want to sound clever, so they type clever articles. Do they know what it was like? Do they know how it can go wrong? Do they care? Because they'll be off when we are down. Where are all the correspondents who wrote all those pieces about human rights and the wickedness of the Thieu regime in Saigon and the monks who were immolated in petrol? They have all dispersed. They've gone back to America. They've gone back to Europe. Some of them have written books in penance and to make money. But 18, 19 million South Vietnamese are living in hell. So, first lesson we learn is, look, we look after ourselves because nobody else will if we don't. And first thing is not to waste savings. I read in the newspapers, I read in the Straits Times, says, MRT, says, why? It's only $5 billion. The Government Investment Corporation, he hears, has got $18 billion invested abroad. Says, just take that $5 billion, build the MRT. Why sell land at Marina South? There's no trouble at all. You know, a new generation. And it happens, it goes back to biblical times. In Exodus, there was a passage which says, and then there was a king that knew not Joseph. See, Joseph helped the pharaohs. The pharaoh died. New pharaoh came up. He did not know Joseph. So, soon there'll be a generation that does not know what I know. Riots, arson, revolution, subversion. Let me explain. We have 14.8 billion Singapore dollars invested in America, Japan, Western Europe, Australia, and a few other countries, but we are trying to minimize them, so put them in less countries, and countries which are sound, stable, and will grow, so that our savings will grow with them. We owe to 1 million, just over 1 million CPF depositors, $14 billion, 14.003 on the 1st of August 82. Now you go spend this money. When the time comes to pay the depositor, you will do what the American Federal Reserve Bank did, just print notes. But you know, they are a big country with technology, military power, great wealth, so they have what is called a right of seniorage, you see. The American dollar is strong. What it will buy, don't worry whether you can get gold for it or not. It's superstition. See what you can buy. We can buy computers, aeroplanes, Boeings, Douglas, F-5Es. What have we got with the Singapore dollar that you can buy? And you get the jitters like Hong Kong got the jitters. The stock market just went into a tailspin. Now, if our money is in Singapore, when confidence is gone, you get a shake-up. Your assets go down with it. But if your assets are abroad, your assets, you hope, unless of course it's a world war, then well, that's different. But if your assets are abroad, your assets will stay up, and you can ride out a storm in Singapore. And that is the first lesson in life. You know, you saw fables, bar of gold. Man gave a poor chap a bar of gold. He says, it wasn't gold, it was brass. But he says, this will see you through. And he put the bar of gold in a case, and he felt confident. And his friends had confidence in him because he had a bar of gold. And his business thrived and prospered. But he never spent it. Had he spent that bar of gold, gone to the pawn shop would have assayed the gold. He says, oh, it's brass. He says, $5. He'd have lost confidence. His friends would have lost confidence in him. No business would have been transacted. Bankrupt. So, my first advice to the young is never go into your reserves. I sound like one of these poor immigrants who've gone abroad, made good, and worried that the children will run through the fortune. And they do. When I used to practice the law, I used to run through the wills of testators. You know, they tied up their property. Grandfather made a big fortune and decided that his children were not to be trusted. They would run through it. So he tied up all his houses, all his estates, and says, so many shares to my son, less shares to my daughter and to my grandsons, males, and less to granddaughters. And it will be distributed until all those who are alive at the time I made the will have died, and 21 years thereafter. Then the law allows them to do that. But you know how they defeat the testator? Long before 21 years after the last person has died, they have gone to the money lender and says, look here, under this will I'm entitled to it, lend me. So the chettiar lends him money, knowing that he will come to money. So a 12% compound rate per month. So when the time for distribution came, the testator's grandchildren and children were paupers. Who came to collect the money? The money lenders. So I received my first lesson in how you cannot control. You cannot have remote control of your children and grandchildren. But at least I owe you the duty of telling you that if you spend this money, when you pay out your CPF depositors, there'll be a riot. Sure riot. Because you'll be paying out Singapore notes off the printing press, Singapore National Printers Limited, Security Brackets Limited. And there's nothing to back the notes. When they go up, you know, in Japanese occupied Singapore, every month, the Japanese companies and the regiments, they call them butais, will pay out banana notes. But they were not bananas, they had coconuts on them. They had no numbers, no serial numbers. They all had the same number, so you don't know how many were printed. By 1945, January, February, March, when you get paid in the morning, you go to the shop and buy everything you can get. Never mind whether you require it or you don't. Whatever is of value, coconut oil, soap, whatever there is, buy it. Because by the afternoon, when the others also get their money, the price has doubled or trebled. By tomorrow, your money is worth 1/4. See? So never do that. And you must have the discipline which the Swiss have, as a self-discipline. They never run budget deficits. The Swiss franc is the strongest currency in Europe, with the lowest inflation rate. And that's why they are a financial center and have been for over 100 years. That's why millionaires, billionaires keep an account in Switzerland. Because it's safe. They know that they will be paid good Swiss francs. Now, if you want Singapore to be a financial center, never run budget deficits and don't monetize your budget deficits. In other words, don't run the printing presses. If you have a deficit, borrow, pay. Never print notes with no backing. I have one last message for the young. It is not possible for any generation to provide for the security of the future indefinitely. Security, both defense against external threats and internal disorder, is something that has to be renewed and adjusted because conditions change. Weapons go obsolete, new weapons are discovered. Soldiers and generals and airmen grow old. The younger ones have to be trained. Doctrines have become outmoded. Methods of budgeting have become old-fashioned. And you've got to keep pace with events, whether it's budgeting by objectives or by programs or whatever it is. And what we can do, what my generation can do, is to provide for an overlap of 10, 15 years, during which another generation begins to update men, weapons, doctrines, methods of government, methods of social organization, civil defense, whether it's from management committees and CCCs to RCs. Life is a continuous process of change. And defense is something like electricity. You can make it and you can store it, but not forever. It runs out. And each generation must make and store its own electricity, its own security. After 10 years, I can give you the most modern of weapons, most modern of doctrines, the youngest soldiers, youngest airmen we can find. But in 10, 15 years, they've gone on, and you've got to refurbish yourself. And you have to learn it the hard way. And that's what the Swiss do. And they take their civil defense seriously. Do you know they have huge caves with air filters to protect their population from a nuclear fallout, and spend billions of Swiss francs on it. And they store food, grain, which they regularly change. So it's always fresh stock. They take themselves seriously, they take their threats seriously. And because they do so, the world takes them seriously, and they've had no wars for 200 years, over 200 years. And people put their money in Switzerland. That's what we must aim to be. Never get caught in the Israeli syndrome. I'm not saying that the Israelis want wars, but they seem to have been caught in a cycle where they are in a war almost every few years. Since independence in 1948, this is the 5th or 6th war. And I was reading last night, they said, oh, the Israeli central banker says no trouble at all. It's a very cheap war. It's only 8 weeks, 9 weeks, $1 billion for the cost of the war and loss of production. Men called up, $500 million, $1.5 billion. Says, we won't be asking for economic aid. We can carry this one. $1.5 billion US dollars. You know what their inflation rate is? 150%. And in order to win his elections, Mr. Begin suddenly lifted up all exchange controls, all import controls, and everybody could buy TV sets and had a spending spree, and he won the elections, and he clamped down again. 150% inflation rate. So nobody puts his money in Israel. Every Israeli has a bank account outside, either in Switzerland or in America. Because your bank account in Israel, even with indexation, means is worth less and less. But we have clear examples. There's nothing new in history. Don't reinvent the wheel, whether to make computer chips, aircraft, whether to seek peace, stability. The world is full of examples. What we want is peace and cooperation, neighbors who are thriving and prosperous, who come and visit us as good tourists, whom we visit as tourists, who are good trading partners, whose economies thrive, and we thrive with them. That's what we have done with ASEAN. It wasn't preordained that was the way it was going to be. It was made and decided by men. We could have gone the way Indochina went, warring, squabbling, desperately poor. And in Vietnam today, they are worse off than during the war, because during the war, the Russians, the Chinese, the East Europeans, the Scandinavians, and all the soft-headed people in the world gave them food, weapons, everything. Now they say, well, you won the war, good luck to you. And they don't know how to even set up a factory because they have lost the skill of peaceful production. All they know is how to fight. And the people who enjoy the perks in Vietnam are the soldiers. All the bright fellows, the bright boys go into the army, the air force, and the navy. There they have privileges. So no talent in the factories, so all the duffers are in the dockyards and the factories. So mountains of goods piled up at Haiphong, cement solidifies, machines rust, country can't move. We have clear examples. So ASEAN was a conscious choice by rational leaders who knew the alternatives. I cannot guarantee you that this will be in perpetuity. You will have to learn to live with the next generation of leaders in ASEAN, and if they are as rational, as stable, and as right-minded, wanting to develop their own societies, then there is no reason why we cannot help each other develop and prosper. But never forget, these are the results of decisions made by men, not made by computers. No computer said that there was going to be a peaceful ASEAN. Several men got together long before the Vietnamese North conquered the South, and we decided, let's keep the communists out of the region. And we should continue to help each other to keep Southeast Asia and ASEAN a peaceful, prosperous, thriving society. And on that note, I wish you all, not perhaps as good a year as last year, and maybe next year will be worse, but the opportunities are there. The future beckons those who see the opportunities. Seize them. Raise your levels of literacy, numeracy, skills, and the future can be immensely better than today. Thank you and good luck.